we're going to talk today about board access, why companies should care, how they can help. So some of the research I'm going to share with you is information that you can share with others. Here's some information about why you should care. When is the right time to start thinking about participating on a board? Some skills for each type of board. There are 4 different board types that I'll cover, and the skills for each. Questions you might want to ask yourself in terms of readiness. What are some of the benefits of serving on a board, and how you might get connected to a board opportunity. Then we'll talk a little bit about next steps and have some time for a Q&A. So I hope that you will enjoy the information, and feel free to type questions in the question box on the control panel of the webinar. With that, I'll move forward. So a little bit about why it's important for you to be on a board. And essentially, the bottom line is that boards make better decisions when they have diversity, when there is a mix of voices, and that needs to include women. Obviously, we are a diverse perspective. There was a very funny story that was told about how Lehman Brothers, if it had been Lehman Brothers and Sisters, might still be around. But I'm not sure about that, but I will say that it is very clear that there is a strong link to gender diverse and generally diverse boards and company success. So companies that have strong female representation at the top perform better than those without. And I have some statistics here in terms of gender diverse boards and the positive impact that has on performance. I think if you talked with any executive team and said, would you like 35% higher return on equity, 42% higher return in sales, 66% higher return on invested capital, I can't imagine an executive team that wouldn't say yes. And yet, that is not always something that's top of mind for folks. And so there are more and more studies that are coming out in the U.S. and across the globe that suggest that strong stock market growth is most likely to occur where there's a higher proportion of women in senior management teams and on boards. And that's why we've seen legislation in Europe and in Asia, more and more countries jumping on this bandwagon of saying publicly traded companies must have diverse boards. We don't have that in the U.S., but I think that we can exert pressure based on the business case and the business value. So let's talk a little bit more about that. One element is the market power that we as women bring. So women make 85% of household purchasing decisions. And more we're seeing that those decisions include technology for the home and elements that used to be considered in the male domain. Approximately 1 in 3 married women out-earn their husbands, holding 51% of the nation's private wealth. That was a surprise to me, but as I talk with friends and colleagues, I find that it is not all that uncommon for women to be the top earners in their families. And the one that I love is the recent Booz Allen study that said women are the 3rd billion. Women are the next global economy, and if we don't leverage the power of women, we are losing a huge opportunity to grow our economy. The next element that's part of the business case is the talent pool. So we're in a knowledge-based economy right now, and women make up a majority of the workforce in 9 out of 10 occupations that are going to add the most jobs in the next 8 years. Not only that, we have 51.5% of all management and professional positions, as well as outpacing men in securing college or graduate degrees. Definitely in the graduate degree space, women are higher than men in terms of numbers of people graduating. That said, we know that this is still an issue and a challenge, and we are not anywhere near 51% of leadership and executive positions or represented on boards. So we know that we still have a challenge in terms of the talent pool, but part of the business case as to why companies would want to do this is because, guess what, the next generation is going to be over 50% women. The business case includes, as I mentioned, 4 dimensions. One, it's about improving performance of the company and improving performance financially and financial growth, return on investment. The second one is better corporate governance. Again, we know that when there is diversity, women think differently and ask different questions. And when a board has a diverse mix of men and women, different questions are going to be raised, and perhaps some of the economic crisis could have been averted. We need to be more responsive to the market. Again, the purchasing power of women not only in the household but also in corporate positions, and accessing the widest talent pool. So just 2 more data points for you to consider. Companies with 3 or more women in top positions show superior performance. That's a McKinsey study. And per women on the top, having gender diversity is a competitive advantage. So it's clear there are more and more research studies that demonstrate the correlation between successful business and gender diversity at the top and on boards. So I think the business case is quite solid. The question is, what can we do about it? And so here's the current state. Women are still conspicuously absent from the top levels of business and still represent a significant minority on boards. In the Fortune 1000 companies, women hold 11% of corporate board seats, and that's pretty abysmal. In 2010, and actually the numbers are pretty stable, 15.7% of board seats at Fortune 500 companies are held by women. And what might immediately jump out at you is that the Fortune 500 companies have greater representation. And in fact, that does hold true. Larger companies seem to pay more attention to this and seem to appreciate the business case and the rationale for having greater diversity on their board. In California, where many of our folks at Watermark are based, women make up just 9.5% of the board members and the highest paid executives in the top 400 publicly traded firms. And that comes from a study that Watermark does, that is done by UC Davis and Watermark supports. In the past 5 years, women and minorities have lost ground in U.S. corporate boardroom representation. What we saw from the ION study, and UC Davis did an analysis of the last 7 years, we are not gaining ground in terms of greater representation of women on boards and in top positions. And really, given that California is an area that is known for innovation and known for being forward-thinking, it's really sad that the majority of California companies are lagging in terms of appropriate diversity, and that includes gender, race, and overall life experience. So that's our challenge. We know that there's a strong business case, and we know that we have not achieved the levels that we need to in terms of representation on board. I believe that it's a question of supply and demand, and so there are things that all of us need to do, because we cannot wait to convince all the corporations that they need to do something. What we need to do is take some action. So here's some things that we think are appropriate for all of us to do. One is to get to know what board participation requires, and I'm going to go over some of that today. Understand the different types of boards, how you qualify for each, and why each one might be of value. And I'm going to go over that as well in the next few minutes. Build your network regarding board participation. Women are challenged a bit in this space in that we tend to network with people we like and people who are supportive of us, but we don't necessarily network with people who can help us in career growth or obtaining board seats. That's something we need to shift. So we're going to talk a little bit about building your network. Develop a board bio. A board bio is not the same as your resume. Boards are looking for something different, and we'll talk a little bit about that. That's one of the elements of the Watermark Board Access Program. Actually, all of these are elements of the program. And take advantage of some board preparation development. There are many opportunities out there. I'll talk a little bit about Watermark's program, but there are multiple programs out there that provide different elements of support for obtaining a board seat. So let me start by talking a little bit about the different types of board, because I think there's some misperception around the value, and I often talk with women who say, I want to get on a number of public boards, it's my retirement plan, or it's the way I'd like to earn a living. And I think that that may be appropriate for some women, but I also think that we shouldn't shortchange the opportunities that all boards offer in terms of career advancement, because each group has its own advantages, and each group is an opportunity for you to build that network that we talked a bit about. So I'm going to start with nonprofit boards, and I'm not starting with nonprofit boards because I happen to be CEO of a nonprofit and a member of several nonprofit boards, but because that is a place where you can both develop your executive presence, build a network of people who can assist you in making further connections, potentially for private or public board service. And it's also a great way to contribute to an area that meets your personal passion need. And there are many women I've talked with over the years who say, I'd love to leave my corporate job and go work in a nonprofit, but the reality of nonprofit work remuneration comparing to the for-profit world is still a big gap. And so my recommendation to those women is to say, perhaps you want to join a nonprofit board or get some experience in contributing to a nonprofit through board service instead of leaving your current job and maybe losing some of the skills that you can leverage in the for-profit sector or the private sector. So there are great reasons. I had a fabulous experience. I was on the board of NACME, which is Advocacy for Minorities in Engineering, and I sat on that board. It was an unusually large board, a nonprofit, a national nonprofit that had board members, my fellow board members were university presidents, were executives, senior-most executives at major corporations throughout the U.S. We had access to the entire STEM program development from the Obama administration. We met at the White House multiple times. We had an opportunity to make a difference in policy and process at the highest level, and this was part of a nonprofit board service. So the network I developed through that, the executive development and the presence it gave me in terms of working with people at the highest level was invaluable. There are some questions for each of these boards that I'm going to pose to you. And I'll go through this fairly quickly, but there is time at the end for Q&A. So questions around service on a nonprofit board, they're going to look at you as a potential contributor, and they're going to ask, what is your area of expertise? What committees would you be best suited to serve on, and why? How could you contribute to this board? The second question, and this is a big one in all boards, is fiduciary and legal oversight responsibilities. When you sit on a board, you have responsibilities. On most of these boards, there are exceptions, and I'll go over those. But there are responsibilities, and there's frequently board member insurance to cover some of them, but you need to be aware of them. Have you already demonstrated a passion for organizations like the one for which you're applying? If you have a passion for horses or animals and you have never done anything except own animals, the question would be, what are you going to add to the board? Is it Is it combining your work experience of large program oversight? Is it applying that to the world of animals? And what is it you're going to do? And how are you going to be able to meet the board's fundraising requirement if the organization has one? Most nonprofit boards have what they call a give-get, which means you need to give a personal donation and you need to bring in money. And that often scares away people from nonprofit service. It shouldn't scare you away because the benefits can far outweigh the fundraising requirement, but you need to be very clear and understand what you're committing to. If you're saying you're going to give, and I've seen it anywhere from $1,000 or one of your two largest donations to $50,000. And so it really is going to depend on the particular board. And then fundamentally, do you have the time to serve on a board? So for a mid-sized average board, you want to expect 75 to 100 hours per year. And that's just one person's example. Every board is very, very different. The next group I'd like to talk about very briefly is advisory boards. Advisory boards serve for a smaller amount of time, and there's no risks or liabilities. They are a way for you to, again, expand your network and contribute. They're often smaller companies, but they don't necessarily have to be. And it's a way to leverage your thinking. Essentially, you're part of an expert team that assembles to generate ideas, provide advice, and so forth. And they're formed with a specific mission, often limited to 1 year. There is no remuneration or financial give-get responsibility typically with an advisory board. Private boards are another way to build executive presence, and they're also going to give you the opportunity to voice your opinion, make suggestions on what policies. They're another wonderful way to make connections, typically with people in your industry. People in a particular industry are going to want people with expertise and the business acumen that you bring to help serve on their private board. And so if you're in the pharma industry, you're going to want to serve on a board that has to do with the pharma industry. You might work for a large company, Genentech or someone like that, and you may be able to bring your expertise and knowledge of how the larger companies play in this space. But remember, private boards can be very large groups also. I mean, with the recent Facebook going public, you recognize that some companies wait a long time to go public and may simply stay as a private company and will have a private board. Sometimes there's remuneration and sometimes there's not. It depends on the private board. So questions to ask is, does your resume or your board bio reflect your strategic acumen, your industry expertise, and specialized knowledge? Again, it is not what jobs you held. It's about where you have expertise. And how would your experience be of value in driving the company's success? You always need to check to see if there's any potential for conflict of interest between this company and where you work. Before you jump into wanting to serve on boards, it's important to understand what the guidelines are at the company for which you work. Some companies don't allow their people to serve on any boards, private or public, and occasionally they'll make an exception for a nonprofit. But you have to go through an approval process. Others just have a very rigorous approval process. But you need to check that out before you go further down this path. Again, what committee would you see yourself sitting on and why? How could you help? Do you have expertise in HR? And could you really help them, this private company, put policies and processes in place that would help them in advance in their people or talent strategy? And what prior board experience do you have? They're going to want to know that you understand the way boards work and the basics. So have you been on a nonprofit board? Have you been on other private boards or public boards? And what we find is that people who sit on boards are frequently asked to sit on more boards because they meet the network of people who serve on boards, particularly in an industry or a vertical area of expertise, and they're going to share, wow, you ought to meet so-and-so, she's terrific, she's a great contributor to this other board that I sit on, let's see if we can get her on this board. That happens frequently. And lastly, public boards. So board members are compensated, but there's also greater exposure to your reputation, your privacy, and financial risk because it is all public record. So if you want to serve on the board of a public company, you need to be aware of what those liabilities are and how you, what kind of protection you can have. Again, you always want to check with the current company to make sure your current company, unless you're the CEO of your company, to make sure that there is no conflict of interest. Some questions are about service on public board. So do you have P&L experience? And typically, the public boards want P&L experience. I do think that this is an old paradigm that we need to break because I think an EVP of HR at a major corporation adds great value but typically doesn't have P&L experience. So I do think we have to break it. But typically, they're looking for responsibility for revenue and sales targets 3 to 5 times the revenue of the target company. So you might qualify for public board service, but you need to understand that the kind of public board that you're going to qualify for may not be the Disney, Ford, GMs of the world. It might be one of the thousands of smaller publicly traded companies. And I think that you need to be just cognizant of where you would fit best and where you would contribute most. Again, your subject matter expertise, your experience in financial, legal, or compliance. There's always a legal component of board service, and so if you come from that field, that is a positive. If you have experience in mergers and acquisitions, if you have experience in compliance, all of those are pluses typically for public boards. What is your executive experience at the C-level or division president? And it used to be said that you couldn't get a public board nomination unless you were a CEO of a company. And there are still boards that do look for CEOs, but there are many more boards who appreciate that loading the board with just CEOs does not give, regardless of gender, ethnicity, or any other diversity pivot, it does not give you the different thinking and expertise that you're going to need on the board because everyone thinks like a CEO. So yes, that is a positive, but also C-level experience or being a division president, depending on your area of responsibility. If you are a division lead for a major multinational, if you have international experience, if you have M&A experience, you are going to have tremendous value for boards. So don't be limited by some of these things. And then do you have experience on the advisory board or board of directors of private company or nonprofit organization? So do you know how boards work? Because there is a rhythm and a regular way that boards work. Very different in the nonprofit sector, but it certainly gives you a sense of board governance and the way boards function. So the basic requirements, no matter what kind of board that you want to serve on, again, require time to commit to board work. Typically, there are between 4 and 6 board meetings a year, and you serve on minimally 1 board committee. There are often board binders that are sent out in advance that you're expected to read and understand so that when you get to the meeting, you are prepared to discuss the topics on the agenda. Also, industry domain expertise, and I've talked about that. Ability to contribute to a committee, and I've discussed that. And then your individual style and fit with the existing board team. And this is something that I believe women need to get a bit better at, and that is not only do we want women to serve on boards, but we want them to serve in a prominent role. I recently heard Jane Shaw, who is the chair of the board of Intel, speak, and she talked about when she first sat on the board of Intel, she rarely spoke, and she took a position sort of at the end of the table. And the then chair of the board coached her and said, you need to sit right here in the power position. You need to speak up more. Oh, and by the way, I want you on the audit committee, which is one of the most powerful committees on the board at all the time. And she was like, but that's not my experience. She's an engineer by training. And he said, yeah, but that's where you need to go. And ultimately, with that kind of coaching and experience, she ended up as not only the chair of the board, but also transforming the way that board performs. And she's an amazing woman with just tremendous insights into the dynamics of board service. She has agreed to come speak at a Watermark event, so keep an eye out for that in the future. So how do you get connected? First of all, it's exposure. There are ways that you need to start the exposure process, and that is talk to people that you know that sit on boards. Ask if you could observe or participate in a committee meeting, if not the board meeting, depending on if you're talking about a public board, you're not likely to be able to attend the public board meeting, but you might be able to attend one if it's in the nonprofit sector, or you might be able to attend committee meetings. There are some enrichment actions, so take steps that fill gaps in your experience or skills to be board ready. If you have no P&L experience, consider serving on a nonprofit board and chairing the audit or finance committee, which gives you P&L oversight and experience that you can add to your board bio. Consider other ways at work where you might take special assignments, volunteer to take the budgetary responsibility for your department, or work closely with the person that has it. So I'm just giving you a few examples. There's lots more. And then personal activities. Take action to expand your network. Have some interviews with people who sit on boards. Meet with people. I always say for people who are going to qualify for public boards, they're typically people who are either in the C-suite or one step away. And they frequently get called by headhunters. My recommendation to them is when you get called by those headhunters, say to them, I might not be interested in leaving my company right now, but I am interested in serving on a board. Can you connect me? Can I have an interview with your search firm's board search person? And talk with them about, what your goals are and what you might need. They will ask them about current searches that they're doing for board seats and what the requirements are. Those are all good ways to help you learn what you need to do to potentially guide your career or tweak it if you're later in your career. And then start on a draft of a board biography and affiliate with industry professional groups. So that's another great way to get connected. In the biotech industry, there is a professional organization. In the technology industry, there's a professional organization. In probably every industry. Affiliate with that group and ask them what connections they have to board opportunities. Keep in mind what's needed as your career evolves. So think about what your next career might do if serving on boards is something that's in your future that you would like. Develop an action plan to explore boards and board service. And we do this as part of our Watermark program, but I think you can do this even if you're not in a program. You can sit down and say, what are my goals? What are the action steps I need to take to get there? And how might that move my progress forward? They always say what you write down as a goal is much more likely to be achieved than what you think about. And so put an action plan on paper or on your computer. In today's environment, it's typically online. But do that with a timeline and steps that you know that you need to take. And that will keep you moving toward your goals. We also ask people to put meetings on their calendars, schedule things, and really make it happen. Enroll in a board readiness program to understand the responsibility and the legal issues. And there are programs at most universities. Junior colleges have programs on board readiness, to Harvard and Stanford programs on board readiness. Those programs focus on understanding responsibility, liability, legal issues, and what it looks like in terms of board service. And now, not to make this into a commercial, but I do want to tell you a little bit about our board access program, because it includes an assessment through Intrabond and a registry, a global registry that helps connect potential board members with board seats. We make individual connections for you, match you with opportunities. We have a one-on-one coach that works with you to help prepare your bio, giving you samples of bios and helping guide you in how to present yourself when you do meet with, we have you meet with a board recruiter and with a board development committee person or CEO. And we want you to be prepared before you have those meetings so that you present yourself with your best foot forward. Our next cohort is going to be starting in September, and you can apply on our website, WeAreWatermark.org. But there are other programs out there. There's also research that you might do. You can progress through our program at your own pace. It's a year-long program. We find some people jump in, do the assessment within their first week, have their first coaches meeting. It is not a huge dedication of your time, but the more time you put into obtaining board seats, the more likely it is you will obtain them in the time frame that you're looking